The night before her wedding, Claire Bennett received an anonymous text message. In the photo, her fiancé Ethan Carter leaned back against a couch, his shirt half unbuttoned, a vivid lipstick stain blotted on his collarbone, a woman pressed close to his ear, her lips nearly brushing the curve of his neck. 7 years together, and for the first time. She felt like a walking punchline. They were supposed to pick up their marriage license the next day. Hundreds of invitations had been sent out. Her wedding dress had been altered 3 times. The new marital home was fully furnished. And their honeymoon tickets were booked and paid for. Yet here she was, staring at that lipstick mark on her fiancé's collarbone, locking and unlocking her phone over and over. Claire stared at the photo for so long that her screen went dark on its own. She saved it to her encrypted album. Then opened iMessage and sent Ethan a text. "County clerk's opens at 9 tomorrow. Don't be late." He replied instantly. "Yes, ma'am. Alarm's set. I'll pick you up at 8. It was followed by a puppy wagging its tail sticker. Claire stared at that sticker, and a wave of nausea rolled heavy through her stomach. She flipped her phone face down on the bed, rolled over, and closed her eyes. 10 minutes later, she picked it up again. She pulled the photo back up, zoomed in, and studied every last detail. She didn't recognize the woman's profile, but she was pretty sharp jaw, long lashes, a tiny diamond stud in her earlobe. Ethan's hand rested on the arm of the couch, his engagement ring glinting faintly on his ring finger under the dim, warm light. Midnight struck. She was 22. Tomorrow was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. She and Ethan had been together since she was 15. Their families had been friends for generations, lived in the same gated community, and sent their kids to the same schools their whole lives. Ethan was a year older. In his senior year of high school, he'd snuck over the fence every day to wait for her outside her classroom, getting caught by the dean of students more times than he could count. They'd done 4 years of long distance in college, him in Boston, her in Chicago. They'd video called until the early hours every night. He'd saved up a thick stack of plane tickets, saying he'd frame them all and hang them in the living room once they were married. He'd proposed the year they graduated, on the middle school field where they'd first met. He'd invited all their mutual friends, laid out roses and candles across the grass, when he dropped to one knee. His eyes were red-rimmed. "Claire," he'd said, "my biggest dream in life is to marry you. I've been dreaming about it since I was 15. She'd cried so hard she could barely speak, and said yes without a second thought. After the engagement, both families were overjoyed. The Carters ran a major real estate empire. The Bennetts owned a leading building materials firm. They'd been business partners for decades, and to everyone around them, this match was written in the stars. Ethan's mother Diane took her shopping every other week, buying her bags and jewelry, saying she'd waited years to finally welcome Claire into the family. Everything was perfect, except for the bachelor party. Ethan's closest friends had insisted on throwing him one last night of freedom. It was tradition. They said every guy got one before he got married. Ethan had refused at first, said it was stupid, that Claire was the only woman he'd ever want. But his friends wore him down, and he finally caved. Before he left, he told her every detail. The private members club in South Loop. Just the guys, drinks and talking. He'd be home before midnight. Not to worry. Claire had thought how sweet he was, being so thorough about it. She decided then to swing by later and surprise him. She knew the club. She'd been there twice with Ethan. It was members only. Discreet, but as Ethan's fiancée, the front desk knew her on sight. She'd have no trouble getting in, so she'd grabbed her keys and driven over. She pulled up outside the club just in time to see Ethan leaning on the second-floor terrace railing, talking on the phone. She stood by her car, about to call up to him, when his voice drifted down through the warm night air. "Come over. It's fine." They all left. Claire froze. That wasn't the tone he used with friends. The June breeze wrapped around her, thick with humidity and the faint scent of some unknown flower. Suddenly, she didn't feel like calling out to him anymore. What happened next played out like a terrible, formulaic soap opera. She didn't make a scene. She just got back in her car, drove across the street, and parked in a temporary spot. About 20 minutes later, a white Mercedes pulled up to the club entrance. A woman in a red dress stepped out. She glanced up at the second-floor terrace, smiled, and walked inside. Claire sat in the driver's seat. Her knuckles white on the steering wheel. She didn't storm in, she just sat there. Watching the lights on the second-floor terrace flicker from bright to dim. Watching the woman never come back out. At 2 in the morning, she drove home. She stopped at a convenience store on the way, bought a bottle of water, and sat on the steps outside to drink it. The night was quiet. A car passed now and then, headlights sweeping across the pavement before fading away. When she finished, she tossed the bottle in a trash can, hailed a cab home, showered, and climbed into bed. That's when the text came. She didn't recognize the number, but Claire knew someone had sent it on purpose. Maybe someone there who'd thought it was wrong. Maybe the woman in the red dress herself. In the end, it didn't matter who. What mattered was that it had happened. On the night before her wedding, it had landed like a bucket of ice water, soaking her to the bone, lying in bed. She replayed every moment of the last 7 years in her head. She'd never noticed the cracks that had been there all along, the lipstick stain in his office ashtray, the long hair on his shirt. Or maybe he'd never changed. Maybe she'd just refused to see the small, quiet fractures. Last month, he'd said he was working late. She'd brought him a late-night snack and found him alone in his office, but there were 2 different lipstick prints in the ashtray on his desk. He'd said a colleague had stopped by for a meeting. She'd believed him. Another time, there'd been a long dark hair on his shirt. Claire had short hair. He'd said he must have brushed up against someone on the subway. She'd believed him. Claire laughed bitterly to herself. She'd always thought she was the sharp one, that she'd never be foolish in love, never lie to herself to make things easier. But here she was, just like every other woman who'd been cheated on, making excuses for him, fooling herself. Outside the window, the sky deepened from navy to pale gray, then to the soft white of dawn. She hadn't slept a wink, but her mind was startlingly clear, as if someone had dumped a bucket of ice water over her head from top to bottom. At 6:30, she got up and washed her face. She did her makeup carefully in the mirror, concealer to cover the dark circles under her eyes, blush to give her skin a healthy glow, a muted rose lipstick that looked like her everyday shade. She even curled her hair and put on the pearl earrings Ethan had given her. The woman in the mirror looked poised, photogenic, exactly what a bride on her way to get her marriage license should look like. At 7:50, Ethan's car pulled up outside her house. She grabbed her bag and headed downstairs. Ethan was leaning against the car door waiting for her, in a crisp white shirt, his hair neatly combed. His face lit up when he saw her. He stepped forward and took her hand. "You look beautiful, baby." He smelled like his usual cologne, but all Claire could smell was the cheap incense and stale alcohol from that club. Even though the scent was long gone from his skin, her memory filled in every detail. She smiled at him and pulled her hand gently away. "Let's go. Don't be late." Ethan didn't notice anything off, or maybe she was just that good an actress. He opened the car door for her and rambled the whole drive about their plans after the wedding, where they'd go on their honeymoon, if they should add a walk-in closet to the new house, if they should start trying for a baby next year. He talked like he was floating on cloud 9. Like every part of him was wrapped up in this perfect, happy future. Claire listened, nodding now and then, smiling when it felt right. She told herself not to snap now, not yet. She didn't want a screaming match and a lazy, meaningless apology. She wanted proof. She wanted her parents to know and understand. She wanted to walk away from this mess cleanly, without anyone calling her dramatic, without anyone saying men will be men. It's just a pre-wedding thing. She knew perfectly well that with their family's history and status, if this was handled badly, it would turn into a circus. She refused to be the leading lady in that circus. When they pulled up to the county clerk's office, the sun was bright. A handful of other couples were already lined up outside, holding hands, fixing each other's hair, all smiling. Ethan parked and turned to her, his smile soft and bright. "Come on, Claire, let's go get married." Claire stared at his face. And suddenly she was 15 again, looking at him in his blue and white school uniform, red-faced as he said, "Claire Bennett, I like you." Back then, Ethan's eyes had been clear as mountain spring water, and all she'd ever seen in them was herself. That face was still the same face, but what was behind it had changed. Or maybe it had never changed at all. Maybe she was only finally seeing it clearly today. She unbuckled her seatbelt, turned to him, and paused for 3 seconds. Sunlight slanted through the window onto her face. She squinted slightly, her voice calm and even. "Ethan, I've been thinking, maybe we shouldn't do this today." His smile froze. "What?" I said. "Not today." With that, she pushed open the door and got out. The June sun was warm, but she felt cold. She stood outside the car and glanced back at him. He sat there stunned, mouth half open like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. She leaned down to the open window. "I don't feel well. I'm going home. Tell your parents we'll talk about rescheduling." Then she turned and walked away. Her heels clicked sharp and steady on the sidewalk. She walked fast, never looking back, afraid if she did, she'd start crying. Behind her, she heard a car door slam, and Ethan calling her name. "Claire, Claire, wait, what's wrong? Talk to me." Claire walked faster, turned the corner, and flagged down a taxi. She gave the driver her address, leaned back against the seat, and finally let the tears fall. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. "Fight with your boyfriend, honey." The driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Claire wiped her eyes, lifted her head. Her voice was still thick, but steady again. "Not a fight, a breakup." The taxi inched through morning rush hour. Claire put her phone on Do Not Disturb. 6 missed calls from Ethan, 12 text messages. She didn't read a single one. She opened her notes app and started making a list. Club security footage, chat logs from his phone, timeline of the woman entering and leaving the club, witnesses, if any. She was going to get all of it. Claire was an auditor. Digging through numbers was her specialty, but digging up the truth about people came just as naturally. In that moment, she didn't look like a 22-year-old girl whose heart had just been broken. She looked like a lawyer building an airtight case. When she got home, her mother was in the kitchen making breakfast. She looked up, surprised. "What are you doing back here? Weren't you going to get your license?" Claire stopped in the entryway to change her shoes, head down. "We didn't. Something came up last minute." Margaret Bennett stepped out of the kitchen holding a spatula, her face shifting from surprise to worry. "What happened? Did you and Ethan fight?" "Mom." Claire finished taking off her shoes and looked up. Her eyes were red, but her expression was eerily calm. "I'm fine." Her mother's stomach dropped. Claire had always been a level-headed kid. She never cried when she fell, never threw a fit when she got bad grades. She always fixed the problem first, and felt her feelings later. But this was different. It looked like she'd stuffed every emotion down into some deep, dark box, calm on the surface, churning underneath. "Okay, I won't push." Margaret set down the spatula and pulled her daughter into a hug. "Go upstairs, take a shower, get some rest. I'll call your dad and your brother. Tell them to come home early." Claire nodded and turned for the stairs. Halfway up, she stopped. She didn't turn around, just spoke softly, her back to her mother. "Mom, if someone hurts you, but says they did it because they love you, is that ever a good enough excuse?" Margaret stood in the living room, staring at her daughter's thin, tight shoulders. She was quiet for a few seconds, then said the truest thing she knew. "No, love isn't an excuse to hurt someone, and it doesn't get you a free pass." Claire's mouth tugged up in something that almost wasn't a smile. "Yeah, that's what I thought too." She went up the rest of the stairs. The second her bedroom door clicked shut, every last bit of her composure crumbled. She slid down the door to the floor, pulled her knees to her chest, and cried silent, heaving sobs. Tears seeped through her fingers, soaking into her dress. She bit down on her lip to muffle the sound until she tasted blood, metallic and sharp on her tongue. 7 years, 15 to 22. He'd been her whole youth. She'd thought they'd go the distance, marriage, kids, grow old together, just like her parents. She'd never doubted him for a second, because to her, Ethan was the boy who'd snuck over the fence to see her, who'd saved up stacks of plane tickets, who'd sat up all night with her when she was sick. But how do people change so much? Or maybe people never change. Maybe she'd just built him up into something better than he was. For the next month and a half, Claire went about her life like nothing had changed. She went to work, came home, kept in regular touch with Ethan. She went to dinner when he asked, texted him back, even sent him the occasional casual update about her day. Her act was flawless. No one suspected a thing, not even Ethan. who'd known her for 7 years, only she knew that every time she saw him, she had to take deep breaths before walking in, forcing down the sick, roiling feeling in her stomach. Every time he took her hand, she felt like there was something dirty on his skin she could never wash off. Every time he said I love you, she wanted to laugh. What exactly do you love about me? How stupid I am for trusting you. How blind I am to all your lies. But she held it all in. She hired a private investigator and gave him a list laid out with the same meticulous logic she used for her audits. Security footage timeline from the club, all license plates near the entrance around the time the woman arrived, Ethan's credit card statements from the last 3 months, and every hotel stay under his name. 3 days later, it all landed on her kitchen table. Neat and organized, the footage was crystal clear. The woman in the red dress kissing Ethan on the terrace. The lingering touches in the hallway, every detail was there. She'd had the woman looked up, too. She knew her name, her job, even her social media accounts. She'd saved screenshots of their messages. Every line more sickeningly sweet than the last. Some of them went back 3 months. 3 months. It wasn't a drunken mistake. It wasn't a one-time thing. It had been going on for 3 whole months. Every I'm working late had been a lie. Every business trip had been a date. Every baby had been a lie. Plain and simple. Claire organized all the evidence, printed it out, and slipped it into a manila envelope. Then she invited the whole family to dinner. It was a Saturday night. She'd booked a private room at a quiet, upscale restaurant in Chicago. Her dad, mom, and brother Liam were all there. Once the servers had finished bringing the food and closed the door behind them, she set the manila envelope in the middle of the table. She looked at the 3 people she loved most in the world, and said, Dad, Mom, Liam, I'm calling off the engagement. Their shock was exactly what she'd expected, but she didn't cry, she didn't yell, she just pulled each piece of evidence out of the envelope and laid it on the table. One by one, club security stills, chat logs, a full timeline, the woman's name and background. Every detail was clear, irrefutable. She'd even made a side-by-side chart matching every time Ethan had cheated with every lie he'd told her about where he'd been. Laid out as neatly as one of her audit reports. When she finished, the room was dead silent for 5 full seconds. Then Liam, her brother, the one who was always joking around, never serious, slammed his fist on the table, his face dark with rage. He was 5 years older. Had always been protective of his little sister. Anyone who hurt her answered to him first. He stood up, already heading for the door. I'm gonna go find him. Claire put her hand on his arm. Liam, sit down. Her voice was flat, empty of all emotion. I've already made up my mind. The engagement's off. It's over between Ethan and me. I'm telling you because I want your support. Not because I want you to start a fight. The families still have to work together. Our business deals can't fall apart over this. I need you all to help me handle this cleanly, properly, no drama. Liam stared at her, then slowly sat back down. He studied his sister's face for a long time, his anger softening into something complicated, something pained. He'd always known she had a mind of her own, but he'd never seen her this calm about something that had hurt her this badly. Claire, her mother's eyes were wet. She reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand, her voice shaking. You've been carrying this all by yourself. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I had to figure it out for myself first, before I said anything to anyone. Her father said nothing. He sat at the head of the table, flipping through each page of evidence like he was reviewing a major contract. When he finished, he stacked everything neatly back into the envelope, took off his reading glasses, and looked at his daughter. Whatever you want to do. Your dad's behind you. I'll handle the Carters. Claire nodded. She felt tears pricking at her eyes again, but she pushed them back. She wouldn't cry, not until this was all over. She picked up her teacup and took a sip. The tea was cold, bitter on her tongue. A week later, the 2 sets of parents met in the Carters' study. Claire didn't go. Her parents went in her place. When her mom got back, she told Claire what had happened. The second Diane Carter heard the full story, she'd slapped Ethan across the face right there in the study. William Carter had sat silent behind his desk for a long time, then stood and offered Henry a solemn, remorseful apology. Old friend, I failed as a father. I'm so sorry to Claire. And to all of you. The Carters were more apologetic than she'd expected. They offered to sign over all profits from their current joint project to the Bennetts, plus a downtown condo and a cash settlement for Claire. Diane had called Claire personally, crying over the phone, saying she'd always thought of Claire as her own daughter, that she was ashamed of her son, that she couldn't face her. The Carters even promised that Ethan would never bother Claire again. Business would stay business. But personal ties were finished. Claire sat on the couch for a while after the call ended. Diane had always been kind to her, had doted on her for years, but kindness was one thing. This was another. She wasn't going to change her mind just because the Carters felt guilty. His parents hadn't done anything wrong, but she wasn't going to be the one who paid for his mistakes anymore. She never saw Ethan one last time. He called her 100 times, sent 100 texts, even waited outside her house all night. He stood there in the June dark, staring up at her lit window, crying into the phone, saying he was sorry, saying he'd had too much to drink, saying he hadn't meant it, saying he loved her and only her, saying she could yell at him, hit him, anything, just don't leave him. Claire stood by her window, watching his familiar shape through the gap in the curtains. He looked terrible, his shirt wrinkled, his hair a mess, nothing like the polished, confident Carter air she knew. For a split second, her chest ached, but mostly, she just felt strange, like he was a stranger, like this man wasn't the Ethan she remembered. She answered the phone once, said 3 words, "Don't come back." Then she hung up and blocked his number. She didn't yell at him, didn't demand to know why he'd done it, didn't ask who he woman in the red dress was. She never even told him how she'd found out, because there was no point. Once something has happened, asking why changes nothing. Ethan lost his mind trying to find her. He went to Liam, who punched him and threw him out. The household staff at the Bennett's estate wouldn't even let him past the front gate. He begged his father to talk to the Bennetts for him. William Carter just said coldly, "You made this mess. Don't drag the whole family down with you. You leave Claire alone." "That's a promise I made to the Bennetts." Ethan was hollowed out. He lost almost 15 pounds in 2 weeks. He didn't understand, so he'd messed up once at his bachelor party. Drunk out of his mind. He hadn't meant it. He'd only ever loved Claire. The woman in the red dress had meant nothing. He'd gotten on his knees and apologized. Wasn't that worth a second chance? No one gave him one, because the second he walked into that club, called that woman, and pulled her into his arms, slammed the door on every last chance of forgiveness. In mid-July, the Bennetts sent Claire away to get some space. Her mom said London, that her aunt lived there, that she could stay a while, see the galleries, go shopping. Forget all about this. Claire thought about it and said she didn't want Europe. She wanted to go farther, so she chose New York. She applied to Columbia University's graduate program in accounting. Classes started in September. The afternoon she hit submit on her application. She sat at her desk staring at the screen for a long time. Columbia had been her dream school. She'd gotten accepted her senior year of college, but turned it down to get married. Looking back now, that choice had been a sign of everything to come. She'd put her dreams on hold again and again for Ethan, built her whole schedule around his, and all the while, he'd taken everything she gave him, and cheated on her without a second thought. Now the wedding was off. Finally, she could go after what she wanted. The second she clicked submit, she felt a weight lift off her chest. She'd thought she'd be sad, that she'd miss him, but once the decision was made, she was calmer than she'd expected, lighter, even. After so long feeling heavy, maybe she'd been tired for a long time, she just hadn't noticed. In August, Claire flew to New York. At the airport, her mom hugged her and cried, told her to take care of herself, eat on time, don't stay up too late. Liam slipped her a black card. Said the pin was her birthday, call him if she needed more. Her dad stood back, quiet as always, clapped her on the shoulder and said, "Go on, your dad's got everything back home." Claire walked through security and looked back once. Her parents and brother were still standing there watching. Her mom was wiping her eyes. Liam waved. She smiled, turned, and walked to her gate. As the plane took off, she leaned against the window and watched the city she'd lived in for 22 years shrink and fade below her. The streets and buildings, all the places that held her whole youth, vanished under the clouds. For a second she felt like she was running away, but then she thought, what's so wrong with running away, if it means saving yourself? Sometimes leaving isn't weakness, it's the kindest thing you can do for yourself. Life in New York was busier than she'd expected. Columbia's program was intense. She was taking 4 classes, spending every day in lecture halls or the library, collapsing into bed exhausted every night. There was one good thing about being this busy: she didn't have time to think about Ethan or dwell on the past. On weekends, she went running in Central Park with classmates or visited exhibits at the Met. She made new friends from all over the world, each with stories bigger and more interesting than hers. One girl from Brazil, Sophia, found out she'd called off her wedding to move here and slammed her hand on the table. Dumped the cheating guy to go to Colombia. Girl, you threw out the trash and upgraded your whole life. Iconic. Claire smiled. She didn't feel iconic. She'd just done what she had to do. But she soon realized it was more than that. Because she was getting better. She'd lost a little weight, but her skin was clearer, her eyes brighter. Back in Chicago, there'd always been this quiet tiredness about her, like she could never fully wake up. Now it was gone. She woke up every morning feeling light. December brought New York's first snow. Claire stood at her apartment window watching the snow fall and realized it was Ethan's birthday. Every year before, she'd planned his gift and surprise weeks in advance, sometimes a jacket he'd been wanting, sometimes a weekend trip she'd put together. But now, he was nothing to do with her. She picked up her phone. There was a text from an unknown number. Claire, happy birthday. Wait, no. Mine. I'm sitting in the park where we had our first date. It's snowing. Do you remember? It was snowing that day too. You had that white puffer jacket on, smiling at me in the snow. I knew right then I was gonna marry you someday. Claire. I'm so sorry. I really am. Please come home. I'm still waiting for you. Claire read the whole thing. She stared at the words on the screen and felt nothing. No anger. No sadness. No longing. Nothing. She didn't reply. She blocked that number too. She leaned against the window and watched the snow fall, blanketing the New York skyline in white. She remembered something her mom had said once. Claire, you've always been like this. If something you love isn't perfect, you don't want it at all. When you were little, you had that ragdoll cat. Someone else held it once, and you refused to touch it again. Made us buy you a new one. Claire had thought her mom was exaggerating back then. Now she knew she was right. That was just who she was. She couldn't stand having something that belonged to someone else too. Not the things that mattered most. Ethan had been her forever. She'd given him every piece of her heart, held nothing back. Now he'd betrayed her body and soul. It didn't matter. It was done. Like ink spilled on a blank page. You can scrub all you want, but the stain stays. She wouldn't pretend not to see it. She wouldn't talk herself into accepting something broken if someone else had touched it. She didn't want it anymore. It wasn't pride. It was self-respect. If she wouldn't honor her own feelings, who would? Claire stood at the window until the snow stopped, until moonlight spilled over the city. Then she turned back to her desk, opened her case study assignment due the next day, and got back to work. Outside, New York glowed with 1,000 lights. Her shadow stretched thin and straight on the wall behind her. Halfway across the country, back in Chicago, Ethan sat on a park bench, twisting an engagement ring in his fingers. Snow settled in his hair and on his shoulders. He sat there like a statue, his eyes red-rimmed like he hadn't slept in weeks. He didn't know when Claire would come back. He didn't know if she'd ever forgive him, but he decided he'd wait, because he finally understood. He hadn't just lost a fiancée, he'd lost the only person who'd ever truly loved him, and the only person he'd ever truly loved back. And the clearer that truth became, the sharper the pain, like a rusted nail driven through his chest, twisting with every breath. Time passed quickly. Claire finished her first year at Columbia with top marks. Her GPA was one of the highest in the department. Her professor pulled her aside and asked if she wanted to pursue a PhD. She said she'd think about it. She wanted to work for a couple years first. That summer, she got an internship at a top accounting firm's New York office, spending her days rushing around Midtown Manhattan. She loved it. Busy, fulfilling, every day moving forward. She made friends who got her, who shared her goals. On weekends they'd go to flea markets in Brooklyn, see shows on Broadway. She even learned to mix cocktails and hosted small get-togethers at her apartment sometimes. She built a full, bright life for herself, all the things she'd once thought she'd share with someone else, now all hers, and she was good at it. She even started dating again. The first guy she went out with was someone she'd met at an industry conference, Chinese American. Worked in investment banking on Wall Street, quiet and sharp and funny. They had dinner at an Italian restaurant. Afterward, he walked her home. At her apartment door, he paused and looked down at her. The message was clear. Claire stood there in the porch light, looking at his honest, kind eyes, and realized she couldn't do it. It wasn't Ethan. It wasn't that she was still hung up on the past. It was that the idea of being close to someone, of letting someone in, made her physically recoil. When someone got too close, she stepped back automatically, her mind flashing back to those security camera clips. Her body had decided for her, long before her heart caught up. That night she took a long, hot shower, sat on the edge of the tub, and thought about it for a long time. She realized the worst thing Ethan had done wasn't leaving her, or breaking her heart. It was that he'd made her stop trusting people. If the boy who'd loved her since she was 15 could lie to her for 3 months, who could she trust? But then she pushed that thought away. Not everyone was Ethan, and she didn't deserve to punish herself forever for one man's mistake. She just needed time. Back in Chicago, Ethan wasn't doing well. In a little over a year, he'd lost almost 30 pounds. His cheekbones sharp and hollow. He'd quit his job at the family company, locked himself up in a condo on the South Side, and stayed up all night, every night. His phone was full of photos of Claire, 15, 16, 22. Every year of them. He stared at them until his eyes burned, and every time he felt more like an idiot. The woman in the red dress had reached out to him a few times, trying to figure out what they were. He'd told her to get lost, said he never wanted to see her again. Alcohol, loneliness, stress, cycled through every excuse 100 times, but none of them stuck. None of them were good enough, not even for him. His friends tried to talk sense into him, said he was wasting away, that Claire was gone, that there were plenty of other women. Ethan just smiled, a cold, empty smile that made them uncomfortable. You don't get it, he'd say. He tried to reach her again. He made a new social media account and sent her a long message from their first meeting to their last dinner. Thousands and thousands of words. He wrote until dawn. After he hit send, he waited. He waited while he ate, while he showered, even waking up in the middle of the night to check his phone. Claire saw it at 3 a.m. When she couldn't sleep, she swiped through the message, skimming all those familiar memories fast and steady. When she finished, she didn't reply. She didn't even block the new account. She just turned off her phone, rolled over, and went back to sleep. Outside, the New York night was quiet. Moonlight slipped through the blinds onto her comforter. Her breathing was slow and even. She didn't cry about it anymore. Ethan waited 72 hours. No reply. He sat there on the floor of his empty apartment, and finally broke. A grown man, on his knees, sobbing like a lost child. He finally understood. Claire wasn't the kind of woman who looked back. Once she'd made up her mind, that was it. Her love had rules. It wasn't endless. You could make mistakes, but cross that line once, and she'd cut you out of her life like a tumor. Clean, fast, no looking back, no dragging it out. The following spring, Ethan made a decision. He was going to New York. He'd find her, apologize to her face. It didn't matter if she forgave him or not. He had to go. He started quietly making travel arrangements, booking a flight. He even looked up Columbia's campus map and class schedule online, trying to figure out where he could run into her. But his father found out before he could leave. William Carter blew up in his study, threw a teacup across the room. Have you lost your mind? Do you have any idea what the Bennetts said? If you fly to New York and harass that girl, our business deals are over. Your mother and I will never be able to show our faces to the Bennetts again. We gave them our word. Are you really going to make the whole family break it for you? Diane cried in the corner. Let her be. Ethan, let her move on. She's finally built a new life for herself. Don't go ruining it again. Ethan knelt in front of his father, his eyes bloodshot, his voice raw, like he was forcing every word out through a broken throat. I'm sorry, Dad. Just let me go see her. Once. If she tells me to my face she'll never forgive me. I'll stop. I'll leave her alone forever. But I can't live like this. Not without saying I'm sorry. His parents didn't budge. They didn't just say no. William called the Bennetts and told them Ethan had booked a flight to New York, so they could warn Claire and make sure she wasn't caught off guard. Liam flew straight to New York to tell his sister in person. So what are you gonna do if he shows up? Liam sat on her couch with a coffee, his brow furrowed. Want me to stay? If he so much as knocks on that door, I'll make sure he regrets it. Claire was in the kitchen stirring pasta sauce. She paused for half a second, then kept stirring. No, let him come. New York's a big city. If I don't want to see him, he'll never find me. You're underestimating him. He's obsessed. Liam set down his mug, his voice dropping. Mom wanted me to ask, are you really never going to give him another chance? Not that she's pushing you. The Carters asked through a friend. They're worried he's gonna hurt himself. And with the business stuff. Liam. Claire turned around, wooden spoon in hand, apron tied around her waist. She looked like any ordinary girl making dinner, but her eyes were anything but ordinary, calm, steady, unshakable. Like someone who'd already weathered the storm. Whether he hurts himself or not isn't my problem anymore. He's a grown man. He has to live with his choices and his feelings. I'm not gonna feel sorry for him because he's miserable, and I'm definitely not gonna get back together with him out of pity. Pity isn't love. Guilt isn't love. He did this to himself, not me. I don't owe him anything. Liam stared at her for a long time, then smiled. Good. That's my girl. He stood up and ruffled her hair. Our little Claire's all grown up. Used to chase Ethan around everywhere. Now you've got more sense than all of us put together. Claire swatted his hand away, rolling her eyes. Don't mess up my hair. I just got it done. But she smiled anyway. Ethan never made it to New York. His parents took his car keys, froze his bank accounts, and had the household staff watch him round the clock. He couldn't even book a flight without them finding out. He tried everything, even booking a connecting flight through Denver to throw them off, but they shut him down every time. The Carters used every connection they had to keep him in Chicago. People followed him everywhere. He felt like a prisoner. He started drinking heavily. Once he drank so much he got a bleeding ulcer and ended up in the hospital. His mom sat by his bed sobbing, saying if he died she'd die too. Ethan lay there staring at the ceiling, pale and empty. He'd become a joke. Rich, successful, young, and he couldn't keep the one thing he'd ever really wanted. Claire found out about it by accident. Someone in the Columbia alumni group chat shared an Instagram post about the Carter heir being in the hospital, with a blurry photo of the hospital hallway. She glanced at it, then put her phone down. The next 3 years, Claire never went home. She got her master's from Columbia, took a full-time job as a senior auditor at that top New York firm. 3 years, 2 promotions, her CPA license. One of the youngest managers in the whole company. She had no shortage of suitors, bankers, lawyers, tech guys, all kinds. She tried dating seriously a few times, but none of them lasted. The reasons were always the same. She was too busy, too independent, too picky about relationships, like she didn't need anyone at all. The last one, a British consultant, had put it best when they broke up. There was a kind of admiration in his voice under the frustration. You don't need anyone, and that's both your greatest strength and your curse. Claire knew what he meant, but she didn't care. She was fine on her own, whole, complete. She didn't need someone else to fill a hole. If the right person came along, it would happen. If not, that was okay too. She'd rather wait for someone worth it than lie to herself ever again. And Ethan, he'd stayed in Chicago, taken over the family business. It did okay. He was quieter now, had stopped drinking, gained a little weight back, but there was always this dull, gray look in his eyes, like a part of him was missing. He never talked about Claire. No one dared say her name around him. A new assistant once, not knowing the story, had flipped through a business card holder and said offhand, "Hey, this card for Claire Bennett at Bennett Building Materials is old. Should I update the?" One of the senior employees had pulled her out of the office before she could finish. That night, he stayed in his office until dawn. Alone, there were no other women in his life. Not out of loyalty. Exactly. He just couldn't bring himself to care. He'd tried going on blind dates. Nice women, pretty women, good families. But 10 minutes into dinner, his mind would wander. He couldn't focus. All he could see was her face. After every date, he'd texted the matchmaker and said he was sorry. That he'd wasted their time. Diane was frantic. She set him up again and again. He went every time. Nothing ever came of it. Finally she'd had enough. You're 30 years old. You can't stay single forever. Ethan stared out the window, his voice flat. What's the point, really? His friends said privately that it was karma, that he'd thrown away the best thing he ever had when he was young and stupid, and now no one else could measure up. So he was stuck, trapped. The third autumn, Claire came home for work. Her firm was handling a large domestic merger with a Chicago-based client, and someone had to go on site for a week. She was the lead on the project. She didn't tell anyone she was coming, only called her mom the day she landed, said she was in town, that she'd be home for dinner. Her mom had yelped in surprise on the phone, said she'd tell the housekeeper right away to buy groceries, make Claire's favorite honey garlic ribs and tomato beef stew. Claire listened to her mom's voice, and her throat tightened a little. It wasn't that she hadn't missed home these 3 years, but every time she thought about coming back, there was this quiet resistance. Too many memories she didn't want to touch, but some things you just have to face. She wasn't that 22-year-old girl who'd run away crying anymore. Dinner that night was warm and loud. Her dad had aged a little, more gray in his hair, but he was in good spirits. His eyes lit up when he saw her. Liam brought his fiancée, a lawyer who was sharp and funny, and they clicked right away. They were getting married early next year. Her mom fussed over her the whole time, piling food on her plate, saying she was too thin, that she needed to eat more. After dinner, Liam pulled Claire out onto the balcony, handed her a glass of wine, and lit a cigarette. Got something I should warn you about. He blew out a plume of smoke, staring out at the city skyline. Ethan knows you're in town. Claire's hand stilled on her wine glass. She wasn't surprised. The social circle was small. News of her flight would have gotten back to him within hours. Did he come see you? She asked. Nah. He called me, said he wasn't gonna bother you. Told me to pass along that he's not the same idiot he was back then. He paused, glancing sidelong at her. Claire took a sip of wine and looked out at the city lights. 3 years away, and Chicago had new skyscrapers. Bright and unfamiliar and still somehow home. She was quiet for a few seconds, then said simply, good for him. You not gonna see him? Liam asked. Tentative. No point. Claire finished the last of her wine and turned to go back inside. Our story ended that night outside that club. Everything after that is just aftershocks. Not my problem. Liam watched her walk away, stubbed out his cigarette in the ashtray, and chuckled quietly to himself. Tough as nails, but he said it with pride. On her last day in town, she ran into him anyway. It was at an industry gala at the Willis Tower. She was there representing her firm. He was there as one of the supplier partners. She was in a tailored black dress, her hair pulled back in a low ponytail, small pearl studs in her ears, calm, sharp, unmissable in a crowd. Ethan was on the other side of the ballroom. He saw her the second she walked in. 3 years. He'd imagined this moment 1,000 times. What he'd say, how he'd act, how far away he should stand. But the second she was actually there, all his plans went out the window. His mind went completely blank. She was still beautiful. More beautiful. Actually, the soft, girlish edge was gone, replaced by the quiet confidence of a woman who knew exactly who she was. She laughed and talked with the people around her, easy and self-assured, like she didn't need anyone to be whole. Ethan's hand tightened around his glass until his knuckles went white. He took a deep breath, stood there for a long time, and finally walked over. Claire. She was talking to a colleague about industry trends. At the sound of his voice, her back went rigid for a split second, then relaxed. Just as fast, she turned around. There he was. He was in a dark gray suit, thinner than he'd been 3 years ago. His jawline was sharp, almost harsh. There were faint dark circles under his eyes, but he was calmer now, more grounded. There was none of that wild, desperate look in his eyes anymore. Just something deep and sad, almost too heavy to look at. Long time no see. She smiled and held out her hand. "How have you been?" Ethan stared at her outstretched hand, stunned. Then he took it in both of his, like he was holding something fragile and precious, too careful to squeeze, too afraid to let go. The spot on her finger where her engagement ring used to sit was bare. "All right," he said, his voice tight. He tried to smile. "Heard you're killing it in New York. Congratulations." "Thanks." She pulled her hand back smoothly. "How about you? How's the company? Heard you landed the East Side Development project last year." She glided into small talk about work and business like it was the easiest thing in the world. Ethan answered her questions, but his eyes never left her face. He searched every inch of her for a crack, a sign that she still cared. She was polite, cordial, like he was just an old classmate she hadn't seen in years. He would have rather she yelled at him, hit him, walked away. The kinder she was, the colder he felt inside. They chatted for 2-3 minutes. Then Claire glanced at her watch. "Sorry, I have a conference call I need to take. I should head out." She nodded at him, polite and distant. "Take care." Then she turned and walked toward the door. Her heels clicked steady and sharp on the marble floor. Clean, no hesitation, no looking back. "Claire," he called after her. She stopped and turned. Their eyes met, and just like that, Ethan's eyes filled with tears. He opened his mouth. Something thick was stuck in his throat. It took him forever to get the words out. I'm sorry for everything. 3 years ago. Those 3 seconds felt like an eternity. He'd wanted to see anger in her eyes, hatred. Even, because hate means you still care, but there was nothing. She just nodded, her voice calm and even, like he was a stranger asking for directions. "It's fine, all in the past." Then she turned, pushed open the glass doors, and walked out into the cool evening air. Ethan stood there watching her walk away, until her figure vanished completely through the revolving doors. He looked down, set his untouched glass on a nearby table, and braced one hand against the edge. Eyes closed. Someone came over to say hello. He waved them off, said he didn't feel well. Then he walked straight to the men's room, locked himself in a stall, and cried silent, shaking tears for a long time. He knew then, for certain, that he'd lost her forever, not because she'd said it's fine, but because of the way she'd looked at him when she said it. There was nothing there, no hate, no anger, no sadness, not even coldness. Really, just nothing, like he was any other stranger. He'd always thought the opposite of love was hate, but it wasn't, it was indifference. Claire had moved on, so far away that he'd never catch up. The next day, Claire got on her flight back to New York. This time, she didn't press her face to the window and watch the city fade. She opened her laptop and got straight to work. Shortly after takeoff, her fingers stilled on the keyboard for half a second. She glanced out the window at the shrinking skyline, and breathed out a quiet, soft sigh. Then she looked back at her screen and kept typing. The plane engines hummed steady around her. Ahead was the wide open sky, a whole other time zone waiting. Behind her, everything else sank under the clouds. One winter, a year later, Claire met someone at a Christmas party in New York. His name was Samuel Hayes. He was an independent architect, 3 years older than her. He talked with his hands, and had 2 little dimples when he smiled. He wasn't old money. He wasn't a setup from some family friend, just a guy she'd met by chance at a friend's party. That night, they stood out on the rooftop and talked for 2 hours, about New York's garbage collection system, about the architecture of Istanbul, about their bad exes, about where they wanted to settle down someday. Samuel said his dream was to build a house by the ocean. Nothing big, just enough for him, a balcony facing the water, so he could watch the sunrise. Claire said that sounded nice. Maybe they could get a dog, too. He looked at her then. His eyes were warm and clear in the New York dark. He didn't confess his love, didn't say some big dramatic line. At the end of the night, he just offered to walk her home. At her apartment door, he said, "Claire, I know you might not be ready for anything serious right now, but I wanted you to know I really like you, and if you want to take it slow, whatever speed works for you, I am okay with that." Claire stood there in the porch light, looking at this man who'd said take it slow, and something in her chest shifted. Soft and quiet, she smiled. "Okay, let's take it slow." Halfway across the country, in Chicago, Ethan was still alone. He still went sometimes to the places they'd been together. Sat there for a while, but he didn't rage or grieve anymore. He'd just gotten used to waiting, even if she was never coming back. Some mistakes only take a second to make, but you spend the rest of your life paying for them. He never told anyone. But in the bottom locked drawer of his desk, he kept an old photograph. In the photo, a girl in a white puffer jacket smiled up at him from the snow. Next to her stood a bright, confident teenage boy. Both of them with stars in their eyes. It was them, 15 years old. First snow. First time holding hands. On the back, in Claire's handwriting from when she was 17, there was a note. The ink had faded, but he knew every word by heart. Ethan. We're gonna be together forever. He flipped the photo over, ran his finger over the faded words, and sat there in silence for a very, very long time.